Simon, hi. So I just thought I'd shoot a video in response to your messages. That might be faster. So, do you use Shane's models, and where do yours differ from his? Um, yeah. So this is I guess an interesting one. I wouldn't necessarily say that these are Shane's models. They're like some of these are concepts or constructs that Shane has pulled together from a number of different sources. Um, as you know, Charlie Munger, Kahneman, like you name it, like a number of these things are just in existence. So mine don't necessarily differ from his. I have different sources that I've pulled together models from, but really I think about it like there are different models apply for different situations. For example, in building business, like at the start, you will probably want some pieces around like innovation and ideation that you might pull from IDEO or Edward de Bono for creative ideation. And then early stage, kind of pre-scale, you might just want to like lock in either like a double diamond process or like have a set of models that is customer development, but kind of really ingrain those in mind. And so that's yeah, that's that. It's just different sources, but I think it's almost also like with how I look at this is that it's kind of like with mindsets, right? Or like different states of mind are most useful in different situations. Like sometimes you want to be attentive and upbeat, and it's useful to kind of like pull out that mindset and adopt that for a given situation. But other times that's not the best mindset or the best state to be in. Kind of same with models and mental models. Some frameworks, like different ones apply for different situations, day in and day out, but also like over the course of your lifetime, like different ways of approaching the way you do physicality that evolves over time, the way a company grows and scales, like different frameworks at different stages. Okay, this might be a longer video than I thought, so let's see. What to use the difference between mental models, principles, values, filters, and heuristics? I mean, there are some differences. Obviously, I mean, if you look at values, that's kind of like, honesty, integrity, determination, courage, unity, these kinds of things. I mean, they're like core attributes of you or an entity, an organization. Whereas, mental, I think it's kind of a question of semantics to a certain extent. The difference between mental models, principles, heuristics. When you're reading, having conversations, or otherwise find yourself out in the wild, do you always try to relate it back to your palace? I could talk you through this. So I usually follow a process in reading, and yeah, I'll share a slide with you on that. But it's not. I don't think as I'm reading I need to put this into a palace like that. Sometimes it depends on the context, right? So if I know that I've got like a short piece that I want to have in my head and be able to teach shortly after or at some point, then I will look at the structure of that, pre-create a memory palace so that when I'm going through that, I can then just create imagery and whip it out and chuck that straight into a memory palace. That's like, it's not advanced, it's not that complex, but it probably takes a bit of practice to get into that state. Same with conversations. So I use kind of short-term storage memory palaces that I use in competitions, or have used in competitions when I was in that weird world, where like I'll use a palace. It's going around my old school, and it's got like a couple of hundred locations, and I only ever use the first 10 or 20 like in a conversation, and have imagery that I'll store in the first 10 locations for like as I'm in conversation with someone. If they're mentioning points that I want to like at some point go and like check up or research more deeply, then I'll store imagery there. But then they just kind of fade, but the palace stays fixed. So yeah, if I'm reading kind of more generally, I don't always know like if I'm reading an article or reading a book, I don't always know exactly what the gems are going to be. So it's a process that many people probably go through, like condensing information from here's a book that you're reading, and you read it, and then you might go back into it, and you might have highlighted some of the pieces, extract those. So there's like I guess, some sort of keyword extraction or key point extraction and condensing. And then from that condensed set of information, that then goes into a memory palace, and then that gets fed into space repetition software. I say it gets fed into, I mean, this is currently in the state of, it's like a manual process to do that. Okay, have you considered setting up each model as a port key teleport to another palace? That'll go into more depth with that model. I have, yes, it works. How do you develop a facility with a model? Yeah, good question. You use it. I mean, it's kind of, I guess in the question really, developing facility, it's like, like with any new language, I regard each of these, like each model, as it's like a lens, really, like any domain, but this is like a small lens within the larger lens of like generic decision making, and you use them, I guess. This is sort of like, so partially, let me answer this question a different way. So the facility is developed, yes, by using, like learning 44 checklists from a startup owner's manual book from Steve Blank and going, okay, how does that apply to the business that I'm currently in? Where am I at? And if I'm coaching somebody who's going through that process, like now that I have those models in my head and those checklists in my head, am I and can I easily on the fly apply those in conversation to help someone understand where they are in a process and what things they should be thinking, what decision models they should be using that are most appropriate to that stage. Hope that helps. How do you structure books in your memory palaces? Yeah, so let me show you. Books. So I do this with all media, really. I don't know, can you see that? Let me just move that over. Yeah, so I've got like book titles. I also have category as well, just over here. Book title, form of media, sort of films, lectures, and so forth. And this is just kind of keeping tabs on author, date consumed. The dates consumed, that stuff isn't in a memory palace. And then this is just for me to keep track of where I'm at with it. Where is it? Ultimately, I want to get to with literature that I find useful. Start reading, finish reading. You can see how this pans out. Just the concept the process that I was explaining before. And then put it into spaced repetition software, and then have I taught it? Have I learnt it? And have I taught it? And that translates into my memory palaces by section, right? So different sections, like got sections on personal development, psychology, history of everything, history of humanity, geography, entertainment, art, literature, the sciences, languages, politics, philosophy, kind of, like a major Dewey Decimal System, basically, but like in a memory palace. And then relevant books go into different sections, kind of like a library, but slightly more entertaining to spend time playing around with. Okay. Do you find that memory palaces are a useful permanent structure for memory, or do you find that they help you remember it for long enough to make enough independent connections to largely leave the palace behind? Yep. It is scaffolding, and over time, I can't really give you a specific, but over time you find that there's two things that really play out, and that is you just find yourself owning the knowledge that you've put into a memory palace. So you don't always need to go, oh, I'm consciously going into this memory palace and then this sub palace and blah, blah, like that. But when kind of hoofing information in and bodies of knowledge in, then yes, that is the process that I use, and it's the fastest way for onboarding knowledge, period. And then following spaced repetition is the most streamlined, systematic way for taking information and like ingraining it into your long-term memory so that you just own it. But then you're right, like, and when I'm following spaced repetition, like the self-testing that I'll be going through is by revisiting memory palaces in my head, kind of from scratch, and recalling that knowledge through the memory palace. But yeah, over time, it's not the palace structure falls away, but yeah, you just kind of don't need it because you just know what you're talking about. But it's like there for reference, there for backup. But also by mapping out knowledge in your head in like an organized, systematic memory palace structure and kind of palace of palaces, you just start to see connections because you're creating a visual shorthand. So, you know, when you see one instance of a heuristic occurring in one palace, in one place to do with decision making, and then you see another image to do with heuristic, it's the same image because like you've coined this visual shorthand. You're like, oh wow, I've seen other heuristics, not just in like this body of organic chemistry, but also over here in this decision science piece in like e-commerce analytics or whatever. And then you can start to like crossbreed, and I think that's when the cool stuff emerges. What do your Anki decks look like? I don't use Anki. I use Memrise. What do they look like? It's like this is what today's looks like. Baby first aid. That's what I learnt today. That's somebody knocking on the door. Human Nature and Judgment, Mackenzie Way, The World, Principles, blah blah blah. I'll be back.